Okay, well, thank you, Eli, for getting us started and joining me on stage this morning.
Thanks
I think
for having me.
we're gonna move forward in our programming. So we're gonna have one more segment of content here that we'd ask you to bear with us and stay seated. It's gonna be a great session. I wanna, in a few moments, bring up our keynote speaker. So let me give you a little background on Charlene Lee. So for the last 2 decades, Charlene has been helping people see the future. She's an award-winning author. She's got 5 books, a New York Times bestseller in open leadership. She also co-authored a critically acclaimed book called Groundswell a few years back. She's recently started in a new role. She's been working in and around disruptive consulting agencies. She's now Chief Research Officer for PA Consulting, which is about a 4,000 employee consulting firm that's international, based out of the UK. She was named by Fast Company as one of the most creative people in business, and she is a digital transformation expert. But today, really what she's here to spend time talking with us about, as I mentioned earlier, is this whole notion of disruption. And she believes that all of us should be doing more disruption. She's tired of having people talk about it. So she's gonna spend a lot of time with us today to actually help us figure out how we live that disruption mindset and some great pointers and ideas how we can bring that in and back to our companies and get moving down that path. And while she gets mic'd up here, I'm just gonna say I'm delighted to have her with us today and give us a few moments and help me welcome Charlene up to the stage.
They don't make dresses with pockets, unfortunately. So, getting my mic here set up. All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. What I'm going to be talking about today are the new rules of disruption. And I talk about this because when we think about disruption, we often think that it is something that we need to avoid, that it is something that it's a bad thing. And how many of you, went through the past 2 years of the COVID crisis, of the social justice crisis, looking at all of these things and think to yourself, how much worse could it be? But also, we learned a lot over the past 2 years. We learned that we were much more resilient than we ever thought we could be. We learned that, my goodness, when the world turned off, in many ways, we turned on. We discovered the importance of relationships in our lives. We discovered the importance of how we are going to work together in new and different ways, in ways that we never thought could be possible. If we had all thought that we could disappear into our homes and go to video, or just completely change our lives, literally overnight, you would have thought, no way. And yet here we are today, living completely different lives, but at the same time, continuing with it. So I think the new rules of disruption need to look at disruption from a completely different perspective. And I liked what Eli and Matt were talking about today is how do you think about the possibilities? What are the things that we can think about as opportunities? Because when we can think about disruption as an opportunity for change, as a way to think about things differently, that's a different type of mindset that I want to talk about today. And how do we do this? Well, we're in many ways impacted by so many technologies. And I'm often asked, as somebody who is practiced and has been studying technology for over 2 decades, what are the new technologies that are going to make a difference? How do we harness the power of these technologies to create disruptive growth? What disruptions are going to create the biggest opportunities for growth? And when I think about this, I step back. I'm thinking about things the wrong way. Disruption doesn't drive growth. It's just the opposite. It's growth that creates disruption. Because when you're growing at exponential rates, when you're driving audacious growth, that is going to be disruptive. The reason why so many companies back away from disruptive growth is you change, you make these plans, you put them in place, and then you get to the point where you go, oh, this is really hard. It's hard to drive exponential growth because it requires that we change so many of the things that we do today. It requires that we think in a different way, behave in a different way. And for the most part, we are not set up to do that well. So what I want to talk about today are what are the new rules in order to drive disruptive, audacious, exponential growth. And there are three things that I want to talk about today. The first one is, how do we see the future? How do we anticipate what the future will look like? And what are the steps we have to take today in order to make that future happen? The second thing we have to think about is, how do we create movements? Because when you move, when you're actually driving that growth, it feels very different. You're going to have to lead very differently. So how do we have to show up differently? What are the new rules we have to play by in order to lead disruptive growth? And the third thing is, how do you build organizations, build strong cultures that can sustain that growth time and time over and over again? This is what drove my original research. You know, there are some companies out there that seem to grow and grow and grow. They're like the Energizer Bunny of disruption. Nothing seems to slow them down. Where do they get that energy? Where do they get that optimism? How do they do this? There's something embedded in their culture, in the air that they breathe, in the water that they drink, the way they interact with each other every day that sustains them. So let's take a look first at what is it that these organizations do to see the future, to be able to anticipate literally where the puck is going to go. Now, who here is a big hockey fan? Anybody? Wayne Gretzky, of course. Greatest hockey player ever. As a Detroiter, really hated seeing him play. So watching him skate, it was an incredible joy. For some reason or another, he just knew where the puck was going to be, where everybody else was going to where the puck already was. But he had this innate genius to be able to do this, but he also trained. He trained constantly, even as a child. He would watch television games with a pad of paper in his hand, in his lap, and he'd trace out the markings and the routes of the puck, looking at the formations of people, and literally studied this on paper, on TV, and then tried it on the ice, trying to guess where that puck was going to be. And that's what disruptive organizations do. They constantly refine their ability to see where the puck is going to go, to see where the future is going to go. One company that did a great job of this is Adobe. They started after the 2008 economic recession, realizing they needed to change their business model. Their business model was very reliant on software being sold on CD-ROMs and being sold to marketers and designers. And they realized the world was changing. It was becoming much more collaborative. It was becoming much more mobile. And people wanted to be able to use these new devices like tablets and phones to be able to connect, to do the things they would normally do on big desktops. Guess what? Phones and tablets don't have CD-ROMs. They also knew that the pace of change was accelerating and that they couldn't go with 18 to 24-month product cycles anymore. It needed to be much more agile. So they decided to change. But they decided also that they realized that there were some major significant barriers to this, major obstacles. First of all, their clients, their customers, these marketers and designers, they loved the product. They loved paying, okay, maybe thousands of dollars up front, but they knew they could use it forever in perpetuity. So they didn't want to have anything different. They didn't want a new business model, updated software, because they liked things the way they were. So the customers didn't want this change. The employees didn't want this change, because when you move from product over to the cloud, everything had to change. The way you market, the way you create products, even the way you run your finance department had to change. Customer service had to change. Everything had to change. And they liked things the way they were. Third challenge, they knew going through this, they would lose money for 8 straight quarters. And as a publicly traded company, how were they going to explain this to Wall Street? So customers didn't want it, employees didn't want it, Wall Street wanted nothing to do with it. So what does Adobe do? Do exactly that. They did this because they realized that the future was calling them, that the future of audacious, exponential growth was there if only they had the guts to make a change that nobody wanted. They knew that people were beginning to want to do things that these designers could do. People who love to look at their photographs, to make movies, to be able to create content for this brand new internet that was becoming so much more pliable in their hands. They knew people wanted to have these tools, and they wouldn't be able to do it if they had to pay hundreds or thousands of dollars. So they decided to make this change. So I'm going to show you how they did this through the language of numbers. Now we're going to show, first of all, look at the revenues, indexed to the day, back in 2011, when they actually made this change and announced it. So their revenues were able to be maintained. But as anticipated, about a year in, their profits took a huge turn because people actually started believing this. They started buying the product. And instead of buying the product that was giving them upfront revenues to justify and offset the costs, they were paying a monthly subscription, and so their profits took a huge loss, as they expected. So what do you think the stock market did? What does the stock market usually do when profits plummet? The stock price goes down, right? Well, look at what happened to the stock price. It went up. And in fact, the more money they lost, the more money they made in the stock market. Now, this doesn't make any sense, right? Because the CFO and the CEO went to Wall Street that quarter in Q1 of 2013 and said, we've got great news. We just lost a ton of money. Isn't that fantastic? But who says that? The company who actually has been telling Wall Street for the past 2 years, this is a change we're going to do. These are the customers of the future we want to believe are going to come. And they predicted exactly how much money they were going to lose. And what Wall Street rewards isn't the fact that you continuously have profits, but that you hit expectations. And Adobe hit expectations going down. He said, don't look at these numbers. These are not the numbers that matter. These numbers that show that consumers were coming in, and we could see these future customers literally signing up in real time, gave the markets the confidence that this strategy was going to work. So this is what it takes. Against all odds, against all the data that says this is the wrong thing to do, no customers, employees weren't behind it, the stock market could potentially punish you and expose you to a hostile takeover, offset by the belief that this future customer existed. This is not easy for Adobe. I had many friends as a company I covered very, very closely during this time, and I thought they were crazy in so many ways. And yet when you talk to the executives, they absolutely believe to the core that this is the way to go forward. This is the challenge of disruption. This is the challenge of true growth, that you have to believe with all your heart that this is the right thing to do. And the hardest part about it, especially if you're a successful company, is to not be blinded by these beautiful, these profitable customers that you have. The ones that pay you so well, the ones that are loyal to you and tell you how much they love you. You get blinded by them and you can't see the emerging markets. You literally need to put on disruption sunglasses so you're not blinded by the brilliance of your existing customers. And the key question here is not that just the entire executive team understands this, but does every single employee in your organization understand this? Because in order for this to work, everybody has to be pulling in the same direction. So ask yourself these 3 questions. Can you answer these 3 questions? Can everybody in your organization answer these 3 questions? And they are this. First of all, who is your future customer? Who is that person? Can you describe them in great detail? Can you understand where they stand? Can you have empathy, literally stand in their shoes and explain what their needs are? Second, can everybody in your organization then describe how are you going to meet those needs? What is that journey? What is your strategy to get from where you are today to where you're going to be in the future? And the third question, can every single person explain exactly how they are going to do this? What is their role in making that strategy a success to be able to meet the needs of those future customers? How many people here feel very confident that if I were to walk in and ask any of your employees these 3 questions, every single person could answer them? Anybody? This is our challenge. It seems so simple, right? That we know who our customers are, we can get the strategy, we know what the role is. This is by far the biggest challenge that every organization has. And when I walk into disruptive organizations, for the most part, everybody can answer these 3 questions. So how do you get there? One organization, this is a financial services company, they drew out a 6-quarter plan. They actually had a quarter-by-quarter plan in great detail. And the amazing thing about this plan is that Q6 was as detailed as Q1. They knew over the next 18 months how they were going to execute on this plan. They had a long-term vision, 3 to 5 years down, but a detailed plan over the next 18 months of how we are going to execute on our strategy. And the interesting thing is they upgraded this and updated this at the end of every quarter, so it was constantly rolling another 18 months. And it was such a useful tool because if somebody was falling behind, if somebody was dragging, you could go to that person and say, you know, you're not keeping up. If you don't keep up, we're going to be behind and we're not going to be able to hit the next quarter and the next quarter and a quarter after that. It was also very helpful in dealing with what I call the jackrabbits, the people who said, well, I know the plan's in Q3, but I want to do that now. I need that today. And to be able to explain to them, we're going to get there, but we can't get there unless we have all the infrastructure, everybody aligned to be able to get there in Q3. You're going to have to wait. We can do some experiments on early things so we're ready in Q3, but this is the plan. Tremendous alignment in great detail what that plan looks like. The other thing that this company did that was so fascinating, each time they added something new to the agenda of what they were going to do, they took something off the table. You can't just keep adding more and more new things and never take things off. This company was really good at stopping things. They were really good at putting together processes for change rather than processes to sustain the status quo. When you are focused on change and you know how to shut things down, you know how to sunset products and services, you know how to move people from positions that they have been in for sometimes decades in a humane and thoughtful way. Because you have the 18-month plan, you know when that is going to come and you have time for transition and change. This is how you sustain change, and this is how you can use the future, being able to see what that future looks like, to be able to execute today. So we talked about how to see the future. I also want to talk about how do you create movements? Because it's one thing to have a strategy, it's another thing to get everybody lined up behind it to say, yes, we're marching in the same direction. And I like to talk about that from the context of leadership. So this is going to be a little bit interactive. Think about the best leader you've ever had the privilege of working with. Think about who that person is. Have them in your mind. And don't think about what they did or said that made them such a great leader. Think about how they made you feel. What are the things that they did, that they said, and to make you feel a certain way? And think about that feeling, and encapsulate it into one word. What would that word be? How did they make you feel? I'd like you to just shout out as loud as you can, especially from the back of the room. What would that feeling be? What would that one word be? Anybody? Empowered, listened to. Confident. Motivated. These are incredibly powerful words. The word that comes to mind for me is limitless. My leader made me feel like I could accomplish anything, not only in my job that I was doing with him, but anything in my life. What a gift. The reason I bring this up is because leadership boils down to one thing, and that is it's a relationship. It's a relationship between people who aspire to create change and the people who are inspired to follow them. And that relationship comes from this feeling that we have, this confidence, this motivation, the sense of being listened to and heard. And when you can tap into that relationship, when people trust you, believe in you, that relationship is deep, well, they're going to follow you through the ends of the earth to be able to accomplish this common goal of change that you want to create. I want to share with you one of my favorite pictures of Martin Luther King when he gave such a famous speech, the I Have a Dream speech. And the reason I love this picture is because instead of seeing him silhouetted against the Lincoln Memorial, this is his view. His view that day, at the end of this really long, hot August day, he gets up to the podium, he gives his speech, and he realizes his speech isn't working very well. His job is to send everyone back home, to be motivated to carry on and to sustain the civil rights movement against incredible odds. And as he's reading through it, he's just really stumbling for words. So he tosses his speech aside, and he's fumbling, and he's trying to think about what to say. And then suddenly, a voice from the side calls up to him. It was the singer Marion Jones, and she calls up to him and says, "Martin, tell him about the dream, Martin. Tell him about the dream." Because she had heard him give this speech, and he launches into his famous words. "I have a dream," he said. "I have a dream of what the world could look like, what it could possibly be." He painted a future of ourselves. And today, we still remember that, and we still carry on that legacy of how do we make the world better? How do we execute on a dream that seems so incredible and still today so far off? That's what we have to do in many ways. We have to think about how can we have these words, these ideas that will launch movements, that will create this change, create this movement of change in our organizations, in our communities, in our ecosystems that we work in, and with our customers. Because when you have a movement, when you truly have a movement, when it grows and other people take on the mantle of leadership of that movement, it creates a movement and energy and a life of its own. And you know you've created a movement when you can step back from it, because movements are powerful when you're no longer at the front of them. When you're no longer there to drive it, that's when you can tell it's powerful. And if you want to create disruptive change, you have to create disruptive movements that will carry on across all those obstacles, across all of these barriers, and just power through them because people are so clear about the future they want to create together. So I want to ask you, how disruptive are you as a leader? How disruptive is your organization? One of the ways to be thinking about this is of disruption quotient, of one being, you're just really comfortable with things being the same every single day. I met somebody this past weekend who's been having the same breakfast for 20 years, the same exact breakfast for 20 years. From a breakfast perspective, he's a 1. But from a change perspective, this person is constantly creating change, creating companies, creating new technologies. He's like a 10, and he pulls hundreds and thousands of people along with him. So he's a 1 when it comes to breakfast, but like a 9 or a 10 when it comes to creating organizations and leading change. So you don't have to be a 10 to be successful. You don't have to be a 10. You could be a 3. You could be a 3 in terms of your disruptive capacity to inquire and think about change. But if your organization is a 2, then you're killing it. But if your organization is like a 9 or a 10, that you're an 8, then you're the laggard. So disruption is very relative to where you stand and where everybody else in your organization stands. So I want to ask this question. We're going to put up a poll in a second. How disruptive are you, and how disruptive is your organization? So if we could put up the poll, you can use your phone, go to menti.com, and put in this code. If you can see it, it's 3872 and then 3643. So go to menti.com and type in this code. I'll read it again to you. It's 3872 3643. And we should see some interesting numbers pop up in a few minutes. So I've asked this question now of hundreds of thousands of people, and also, again, just many, many multiple hundreds of organizations. And it's always fascinating to see what shows up. Now, I know this group in particular is a bit more leaning towards more disruptive things, because you're here thinking about and using the most disruptive technologies out there to drive tremendous amounts of change. And yet, this is pretty much what we're seeing in organizations. People tend to see themselves as more disruptive, than their organizations. When I do this with executives in boardrooms, it's really interesting because they all see themselves as more disruptive than their organizations, and they are the leaders of the organization. So my question becomes, why are these things not so aligned? Where is that disalignment? But also, if you can see the bell curve here, there's a very wide range. What would happen if you were going to ask your organization the same thing? What would be the diversity of comfort level, of capacity to be able to create disruptive change? So let's look at these numbers a little bit. Can we go back to the numbers for a second? I just want to look at them. Sorry, Liam, trying to make you flip back and forth here. But we saw the numbers were hovering around 6, I believe, for the people, and then a little bit lower than that for the organizations. And that's typically what we see. So there we go. Go back forward. It's okay, we'll just stay with the slides. But you saw the numbers there. The key thing is you want to be thinking about what is that number? What do you want to be as a disruptive organization? Because it's made up of the people. And to know and take that pulse with your own teams to say, where are we? Who are the people who really feel we want to go faster than what everyone is? Who are the people who say, I need some more time, I need some more space to get to that point? And a lot of the research, and I have it in my book, are the various archetypes of leaders that you have in the organization. And you may think about the people who are the slowest, the least disruptive. I call them the worried skeptics. They're not the people holding you back. In many ways, the more you embrace them and embrace the fact that they can literally see around corners and anticipate all the things that could go wrong, because I guarantee you, things will go wrong. Their role is to think about all the contingency plans, to be the naysayers, not say we can't go forward, but how do we go forward? But if you have worried skeptics and people who say, I don't believe in this future, I question this future, then you need to have a different conversation with them to say, is this the right place for you? We have to be willing to have those questions, have those conversations, because you can't afford to have anybody not be a part of this movement. Because I do believe you can only go as fast as your slowest worried skeptic. So make sure you have these conversations. How disruptive do we want to be? How disruptive are we? And how are we going to get there? And the way you get there is to think about your culture, to think about your organization. What are the things that are going to move us forward, but also what are the things we do, that we say and believe that hold us back? Because culture is simply this. It's simply what you believe and what you behave. Your beliefs drive your behaviors. The way you behave with each other drive your beliefs. Fundamental one, belief. We have to be in person to be able to collaborate. We have to be in the office to get things done. Well, that belief was blown out of the water over the past 2 years. Our behaviors now have created new beliefs. And one of the most interesting ones is that we no longer have to check our own personalities, our full selves, because frankly, we can bring our full selves, all of our beautiful, messy lives to work now, because honestly, we have seen it all. We have literally looked into each other's bedrooms and seen the messy of our lives and now accept it. Fundamental belief in change, that we can be more flexible, that we can understand, we have more give and take, more understanding, more empathy for each other. And I think we're so much better off because of this change in belief and behaviors. There are 3 beliefs of disruptive organizations, and I'm going to go through them in order. The first one is openness. These disruptive organizations that I studied all had this one belief that openness, more transparency, more information being shared was better, because it develops transparency and it develops trust, because it creates accountability of what's really happening. What's truly happening out there. There's no place for any data, information, or people to hide from the truth. And so the question to ask yourself in your cultures is, how open and honest are we truly with each other? Do we really tell the truth? Are we honest and say, hey, there's something I think that's going wrong here. There's something I want to check in with you about. There's something I need to clear. And one organization I saw this change literally in just a few months was Nokia. I was speaking with the chairman to just confirm, how did you create this huge culture change? Because they went through so much trauma when they realized they had to give up their mobile handset business because they had not paid attention to Android and Apple iOS coming up. And the chairman, Mr. Silisma, said this, had a great saying, no news is bad news. Because as a board, they were not hearing any of the new information because they just didn't want to hear the bad news. Bad news is actually good news. Because when you have bad news and it's brought forward, then you can actually do something about it. You can start problem solving. You can bring all the experts from around the organization to deal with this. And good news, well, it's no news. It's happening the way we expected it. So, yeah, celebrate it, but we need to move on. And one of the biggest questions becomes, can we be honest with ourselves, with each other, with ourselves even as leaders? What's really going on there? Can we speak our truth? Can we handle it? Can we be brave enough and courageous enough to accept and understand what that truth is? And one practice that Amazon has in particular, one of their leadership principles that I think is fantastic, is disagree and commit. It says we have such strong relationships. We are so good with each other. Our relationships and connections are so strong. We trust each other so much. We can fight really, really hard for the truth and the path that we think should be there. Because when you are trying to see the future, it's never clear. It's murky. So you're going to have sometimes very, very different views of what that future could look like. And you have to be so strong with each other, so good with each other, that you can fight really hard for that future. And when that decision comes down, when it's made, to pick one decision over the other, you can say, I'm good with that. Because when you can commit 100% against something that you didn't believe in, but regardless of that, you're going to commit, it means that I am, no matter what the outcome is going to be, I will know that I had done my best. The outcome is not going to be dependent on the fact that we didn't put our foot forward. We did our best to make it happen. It was a wrong decision, but we'll come back and we'll make another decision to keep moving forward. What was amazing about these disruptive organizations, I could sit in these meetings and they would have these really tough discussions and then go and have dinner together, go out and play golf, play tennis, have great drinks and connect with each other because they knew that they were 100% committed to whatever the outcomes would be, good, bad, or no matter what happened, they were going to be okay because they had each other. And how often do you see that in your organization? Do people truly, truly disagree? Or are they cordial? Are they polite? Are people nice to each other? Because we can't handle conflict. How open are we truly with each other? How honest are we with each other? Because you can't go on this disruptive journey. You can't create movements. You can't do this hard work of disruptive, exponential, audacious growth if you truly do not trust each other. So this is the most important thing. It seems so easy. Let's just be open with each other. But openness opens so many threads. You start pulling it and you understand deeper and deeper and deeper how truly open, how truly transparent, how accountable are we going to hold ourselves and each other so that we can develop trust. So that's the first belief, tremendous openness to drive that trust. The second one is agency. And the question to ask yourself is, what kind of relationship do you want with your employees? Is it a relationship where you tell people, come to work, this is your job, do it. Don't look up, just do your job. Don't ask questions, just do your job. That's beyond your pay scale. Do people in your organization constantly say this? I don't have permission to try new things, to ask questions, to even anticipate that things could be better. So the key thing here that I find with organizations is, well, I want people to be accountable to really get things done, but people don't stand up. Well, you're not trusting them. Well, I'm delegating things to them, but delegation doesn't create accountability, it's ownership. It's only when people feel like they own the outcomes of their labors that they truly become accountable. Otherwise, they're just doing it because they have to. They're being told to. They don't own it, really. And that's what agency is. Agency is a sense of ownership. No matter where you stand in the organization, you believe that you have a stake in the outcome. In answering that third question I asked at the beginning, what is your personal contribution to this? says and requires that there be agency in every single one of your employees. And yet we know this is something very hard to develop. Every single person has agency. Is do you allow it to come through? And one of the best ways to do this is to create edges, to create rules and guidelines and processes and guardrails. Think about the game of tennis or any game with no rules. It's not very interesting. You see kids playing and immediately they set up rules about how to play, how to engage, how to get things done. And unless you do that, there's no ownership of what you can do. So in the beginning, if there's not a strong sense of agency, you'll want to create very, very tight rules so people know how big that box is, how far they can go. And then over time, you can create bigger and bigger boxes, pushing those boundaries so that people can stretch their sense of ownership, their sense of agency. And here's the key thing. Just because you draw the rules in the boxes, you have to also show people where those edges are. We saw the edges over the past 2 years. We took ourselves and our organizations right up to the very edge. And my research shows now that people feel so much more capable, so much more powerful, so much more confident than they did 2 years ago. Because we've been to the edge and we know we're stronger and more resilient than we ever thought ourselves possible. So take yourself and your teams to the very edge of what is possible. Go out to the very edge, look over that edge and go, whoa, going over that edge, that's really scary. We can't go that far. So take one step back onto safe ground again. But please, please, don't go all the way back to home base. Don't go back to safety. Stay at that edge. And if you stay at that edge with your team members who also want to be there with you, that together you're going to be at that edge, then if one of you should ever stumble or fall, everybody else will be catching you together. You know everyone else is there with you. That again gives you that confidence. So agency is such an important thing, but the third belief is a bias for action, because we believe that the future is moving faster and further away from us than we are. So how do we act? How do we do that when we are constantly afraid of failure? So ask yourself, what's our relationship with failure? How do we think about it? For many organizations, we just basically try to avoid it as much as possible. We don't talk about it. We may do a quick debrief or postmortem, but it's onwards again. Let's not really take accountability and really dissect what went well, what went wrong. Because organizations that do this really well have a great relationship with failure. They don't think about it as failure. They think of it as a step towards success. I heard a friend talk about it this past weekend. Failure, we don't do failure. We think about it as feedback. It's giving us constant feedback, more data that says, well, if this was our goal, we ended up here, now we have more data, we have more information, more feedback about what it's going to take now to close that gap, to get to the point we want to be. And the reality is this. The reason why we are so hesitant to talk about failure is because we think that everything has to be a success, that everything we try has to be 100% success, because if it didn't, it meant that we made the wrong decision, and we can't go back, right? We can't go back. But of course you can go back. Of course you can change your mind. We just don't want to deal with the shame that comes with having to say that we were wrong. The reality is, most of our decisions, 99% of our decisions are reversible. And yet we act as if every single one of them were irreversible. And therefore we put a huge amount of time and effort into making sure we're absolutely right before we take even the most simple decisions. What could happen instead if we were to decide what's the minimally viable amount of data that we need? Just a little bit of data to know that option A or option B is better for us. We'd be moving so much faster, because once you make that decision, you step into that new space, you can see new things, you see things differently, you have more data, more feedback, whether that was the right decision or not. And if not, take a step back again, look at the data from new perspectives, make new choices, develop new choices, and keep moving forward. This bias for action is so key. And the one key trait that these disruptive organizations had, they had a fantastic relationship with failure. They didn't just fail smart or fail fast. They erased the idea of failure from their vocabulary. They said we never fail because we're constantly learning. They removed the idea and that emotion of shame, of failure that attributes to each person individually. Well, it didn't work, we feel bad. No, it didn't work, we feel great because we just learned so much more about the direction we have to move in. So think about failure in the context of how do we think about and deal with it. I want us to think about what are the beliefs that we have in our organizations, the things that we say to ourselves. I'd like to pull up the last interactive poll we have. It'll be the foundation, I think, for some good discussions as we go into break. We're going to go and use our phones again and just put into that. If you could show up the poll here. Oh, we're already seeing it. Great, fantastic. I think you're getting the hang of this. Go to Menti.com and put in that code again. Let's just put in a few words about what are some of the beliefs that you think are holding you or your organization back. I have some here already. Fear of change in the new future. That's how we've always done it. I love this. We've been successful to today. We've always done it this way, so we should just keep doing it, right? Well, people with disruption mindset says, that's great, but what are the ways that we don't know about that could be even better? We don't know unless we try. Fear of making mistakes, getting fired, a good one, being wrong, we talked about that. Shooting the messenger, love this one. I don't want to be the bearer of bad news. Nobody else says any bad news. This is why openness is so important. Not sure where may it take us. Fear of failure, lack of desire, liking the status quo. We must always be profitable. It's called investment. Sometimes we have to be unprofitable in order to make money in the future, but if you know it and you know you can handle that loss, because you have more than enough cash, why not make that investment? Progress only comes from success. It's too hard. We're prioritizing nicety. I love this. I was talking to somebody who said, you know, we have a culture of toxic positivity because we'll always have to be positive. We can't talk about anything negative. Our CEO won't hear about any of the challenges. Well, I do believe that the best and most powerful persona of a leadership is the realist optimist. Believe in the future, see the future, and also can deal with the reality of what the things that we have to overcome today. Look at a few more here. We must remain comfortable. Oh my goodness, we'll talk about that in a second. Disruption and growth is not comfortable. If anything, it's just the opposite of that. It's going to hurt our reputation. We're being exposed as a fraud. Imposter syndrome. Oh, there's so much to mine there. How many of us feel like, I can't be possibly able to lead? I'm here because of all the different reasons and privileges or the advantages I've been given. So many ways to think about that. I'm going to make sure we download this and share it back with you all, but I think in many ways, let's go back to the slides. In many ways, these are the beliefs that hold us back. I gave you one exercise to take on with your teams. How disruptive are we? How disruptive are we individually, but also take this back to your teams. Do this exercise, write down on individual Post-it notes, what are the beliefs that are holding us back? You know, fantastic brainstorming technique where everybody's voice can be heard. Throw all those sticky notes on the wall and say, group them together and say, you will come up with 2 or 3 different beliefs that you all agree on. We don't believe this anymore. We don't want to believe this. Take those and agree with each other. We're not going to believe these things anymore. And instead, we're going to replace them with these new beliefs. The old beliefs, out the door. I don't have permission, fear of failure, we don't have the budget, any of those things. Instead, we're going to have these new beliefs. And whenever we hear ourselves talking about these new beliefs, whenever we see ourselves behaving in accordance with those old beliefs, we're going to call each other on it and say, no, 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 we don't do those things anymore. We don't think that way anymore. Instead, we're going to think about and do things in this new way. And anytime you see rituals or stories or symbols that talk about the old way of thinking, you get rid of them, you address them, you clear the air. Because if those old beliefs have even an inkling of oxygen to live on with, they will continue to live and fester in your organization. So if you want a great culture that's capable of driving disruptive growth, you've got to look at the beliefs. Decide as a team, you're no longer going to believe them, and instead move towards this new way of thinking and believing. If you do this right, then this is what's going to happen. Magic is going to happen. I guarantee you, it's not going to be comfortable. It's going to be far, far out of your comfort zone. You will know you're doing it right when your palms are a little bit sweaty, when your stomach's a little bit churning, when it feels, wow, this is a little scary. But that's where you feel disrupted. But it's disruption that you know is going to be good. And you've put up enough scaffolding, enough structure around you to have that container, to know that even though I'm uncomfortable, I have enough structure. I have enough process. We are together and strong as a team. We're creating this movement together. We're aligned around that vision that sustains you. This is the contradiction of disruption. In order to have all of this change, in order to have all of this chaos and the innovation and all of that, you need to have order also as well. Change and order live together. You have to have order for the disruption to happen. And that's why these disruptive organizations do things so well over time, is they have a process and a structure for change. You think there are these people with whiteboards running around doing all things. These disruptive organizations are actually incredibly well run, incredible amount of process, but everything geared towards change. Because then they put no energy in trying to figure out how they're going to work with each other. They put all of their energy into creating that change. And that's the magic of the disruption mindset, the new rules of disruption. They get to see the future, create movements, but also create that container for change. Create this crucible and way to hold everybody in place. Because disruption is a mindset. It says, I believe in the change, but also we're going to remove the agony, hard part of it, which says everything is falling apart. No, we have structure. We have that stability to be able to create all that change that we want to have. So if there's nothing that you can take away from today, it's to think about disruption as an opportunity for change. It's a new way of thinking, new rules to have to work by. I encourage you to please stay in touch with me. I have the slides available for you, more and more resources than you could even imagine at charlenelee.com/via with the I instead of the exclamation mark, because it doesn't work in the URL. And then also, we found out, and then also, I put my email address up here too as well. You can reach me at charlene@charlenelee.com. You can also reach me at my company, charlene.lee@paconsulting.com, whichever way is easiest for you. And my key wish here for you is that you think about all the change you can have. It should make you feel like, ooh, I don't know. Can we actually do that? Can we get away with that? You won't know unless you try, until you step into that future and see what it could look like. But prepare yourself, prepare your organizations for that disruption to come, and really try it on, and prepare yourself with the structure, with those relationships to be able to carry through. All right, we're going to have some questions from the audience, and then we'll adjourn into a network break after that. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.